Hey everybody, in this video we are going to talk about the most memorable Bad Gear episodes, and I will rank the synths, drum machines and grooveboxes using what was called a tier list by the
cool guys here at school
around 5 years ago. Per usual, my verdict will be absolutely impartial, unbiased and a manifestation of pure objectivity. There are over 200 Bad Gear episodes out there, so thanks to the great people over at Patron for doing a little pre-selection, and I allowed myself to sneak in a few personal favorites.
Let the games begin! I'm very aroused.
Korg Microkorg. This one is very close to my heart. I bought mine on the Austrian version of Craigslist years before I started this channel, and the seller and I got completely hammered afterwards. It is also the video that got me monetized here on YouTube, and it helped me shape the Bad Gear concept as we know it. The synth itself is, of course, a total classic. It is one of the most successful electronic musical instruments of all time, and it is based on an MS-2000 engine, which is not shabby at all. Korg announced a version 2 which will definitely end up on this show. The original Microkorg, solid tier A. Teenage Engineering Choir. These caused me nightmares for two reasons. First of all, I was afraid that they would go full on Chucky and murder me in my sleep, and secondly, it is close to impossible to make music with them, unless you're Heinbach. Sound generation is primitive, more like a 90s vocal synthesizer, and Bluetooth MIDI, which is the only way to communicate with the dolls, doesn't work properly. They're also rather difficult to mic up, just like a real choir. F tier. EMU Orbit. This is probably the most fun piece of gear I've ever had on the channel. It looks groovy and it is filled to the brim with a pandemonium of 90s rave abominations. It's grimy, lo-fi and dirty, but the synth engine is surprisingly deep with great filters and effects like the Bat Phaser. I bought mine rather cheaply, and whenever I turn it on, it smells like a Southeast Asian fish market, so I don't use it as often as I want to. B tier. Arturia DrumBrute. The DrumBrute is probably the best analog drum machine with the most unusable sound I've ever had the displeasure to work with. It is, by the way, the only instrument on Bad Gear I made no actual music with. I do love its little sibling, the Impact, and use it all the time. However, the original is great for your Insta swag and looks fantastic in a setup if you want to impress people who are not into synths. D tier. Elektron Digitakt. It's my baby, the backbone of most of my setups, and I'm contemplating getting a second one just as a backup. Of course, it is all about the workflow, but it also sounds great, and it took me only 2 years to learn. Keep in mind that it comes with completely random limitations, so you either love it or hate it. For me, straight S tier. Ensoniq Fizmo, an artifact enshrouded in mystery made out of a rare alloy consisting of unobtainium and unicorn hair. It's expensive, especially the wrecked version. A friend of mine was DJing at a party, and, as is tradition, I ended up at a table of like-minded synth heads. As a joke, I asked if anybody owned a Fizmo, and to my surprise, a guy said, "I don't, but I know a guy who knows a guy who shares the studio with a guy who owns two." It took me around 2 days to find the guy, and this absolute legend, thank you so much, just took one of his Fizmos, drove to my place without knowing me or the show, and handed it over to me with the words, "Don't worry, I know where you live now." I was a bit terrified, not only because of that, but also because we were in the midst of a massive heat wave back then. Fizmos have a history of being fried by their own internal power supplies, so I lived in constant fear of seeing the holy grail of 90s sound design going up in smoke. Decent sounds, weird UI, C tier. Get a Hydrasynth. Teenage Engineering OPC or OPZ. This is probably my favorite piece of Teenage Engineering gear. However, build quality sucks, the UI sucks, and you definitely need a phone or tablet if you want to get the most out of it. I'd buy one if they released it as an actual groovebox. B tier. Yamaha DX7. It's basically 80s pop music PTSD in a box, so B tier. In case you actually wanna tweak a 6.0p FM, download text or use something like a Korg Volca FM. This one is incredibly powerful, the UI is great and sound quality is more than decent. It's compatible with DX7 patches, which is awesome. There are some limitations when it comes to polyphony and velocity management. Korg worked on that in version 2. It's probably not for you if you are a real keyboardist. For me, A tier. Roland JD-08. Did you notice? Did you notice? It's the first piece of Roland gear on this list. In all honesty, I found it to be very inspiring. Yes, the UI with its microfaders is an insult and the filter is not super authentic, but it's still better than having red glue dripping from the keypad of an original JD800. A tier. Elektron Digitone. It's like a Digitakt with a super pristine sounding Sega Genesis sound engine instead of all the sampling stuff, and it's surprisingly easy to tweak for an FM synth. I actually preferred the tonal stuff to its drum sounds, but with its limited polyphony, it's designed mostly for use as a drum machine, which was a deal breaker for me. B tier. Teenage Engineering PO Modular 400. I liked the sound, I hated the concept, and tuning is a real problem here. It's basically a DIY kit made of cheap components, so it might be better suited for room decoration than actually making music. D tier. Barbinger, aka Behringer TB-3. It still blows my mind that they didn't sue me. A tier. Roland TB-3. It's green, it's ugly, it's plastic, it has become my favorite mono synth. There's an entire video on this channel celebrating the greatness of this severely underrated instrument. I'd say that Roland captured the spirit of the original TB-303 with this machine. Just enter a random sequence, go to town with cutoff and resonance, that's it. God tier. Teenage Engineering OP1. It is, without a doubt, the piece of gear that defined the 2010s, but it's the polar opposite of what I personally want in a groovebox. I had to pass an analog tape editing exam back in the day, so virtual tape is definitely not for me. That being said, it sounds great, and if you click with the workflow, good for you. For an OP1 person, definitely S tier. For me, D tier. Moog DFAM, the drummer from another mother. The most awesome and brutal sounding device for creating an endless catalog of analog fart-based percussion sounds. It comes with a massive facepalm factor because of the countless and seemingly intentional limitations though. Shame that the version of this synth you actually want is not made by Moog. B tier. Beat Kangz Beat Thang. Finally, the epitome of bad gear, the OG, the one and only notorious Beat Thang. The whole story surrounding this hip-hop centered groovebox is worthy of its own Netflix show, and I'm totally willing to appear in a cameo role. It's a massive machine, the pads are great, and it had so much potential, only to be eventually sold in a 2015 blowout sale at Best Buy. A tragedy of epic proportions. E tier. Hope you enjoyed this little tier list. Don't forget to leave an angry comment about me misrating and or not including your favorite piece of bad gear. Thanks again to the great people over at Patreon, and thank you for watching. See you next time.